That's a good question. Um, I, boy, nobody ever asked me that before. I mean, I think just in general, it's how the NFL responds to these criticisms about its gambling. I mean, the league is constantly saying it has to protect itself. The league's constantly saying we're all about our integrity. And yet, at every turn, whether it's the Ray Rice incident where he punched out his then fiance in the elevator and the NFL tried to cover it up, every turn you run into, the NFL really shows that it doesn't have this integrity that it claims to possess. And, I mean, they rely heavily on this security force that they possess, this NFL security, which is staffed with former members of the FBI and DEA and Secret Service. And these guys exist to really, my belief, and I think many other people's belief, they exist to cover things up. And they do a really good job at it. And not only do they do a good job at it, but the media, which is a direct partner of the NFL, ESPN funds the NFL, NBC funds the NFL, CBS, Fox, they'll literally fund this league and make it go round. They're not an adversary to the league. So when you have NFL security working on one end to cover things up and the networks not wanting to really produce any dirt on this league, it makes the league look clean, despite the fact that really when you look underneath it all, it's not. And this integrity thing is just an appearance, and that's what they rely upon.
That brings up a very interesting moral dilemma. Obviously the NFL, they have a lot of very unscrupulous things going on, especially under the Roger Goodell era. But then again, every Sunday we're going to have half the country watching the Super Bowl. So does it kind of make us hypocritical to be such consumers of this?
Not entirely. I mean, on one hand, the way I look at the NFL or any of these sports anymore is it's entertainment. They tell you it's entertainment. Before the game it says the following is a production of the National Football League. What does production mean? Well, it means it's entertainment. It means it should be just taken as entertainment and nothing more. And if you watch it for 3 hours and you're entertained and you walk away, then fine. But the problem is it's become so consuming and there's so much written about it, so much talked about it, so many people are distracted by it. It turns into something over and above sport. And that's my issue with it, is that it's not just a football game, a 3-hour experience, and then that's over. It's, this whole season lasts, from September until we're going into February with the Super Bowl. It takes up half the year, and people are consumed by it, and they ignore other things, and yet it's the most watched sport in the country. It'll be the most watched televised event in United States history, probably Super Bowl 50, and the league just keeps on rolling despite all this undercurrent of, inconsistencies within the league.
And when you were doing the research for Season in the Abyss, did you note any sort of dissimilarities and commonalities between the different gambling subcultures?
Well, what do you mean by the different subcultures?
Depending on the method of betting. Perhaps you're doing the daily fantasy. How did that culture differ from perhaps the culture of people who are involved in offshore betting?
Well, I think there's most of the people who do either. If they're betting with a bookie, if they're betting offshore, if they're doing daily fantasy sports, the vast majority of people lose. And it's funny because basically I think every guy, and it's mostly men who do this, who get into it on whichever version you want to choose for gambling, they don't think they're going to lose because they usually think they know enough about the sport, which is why they're willing to put their money into it and back their opinion, that they think they're going to win, but the vast majority lose. I mean, daily fantasy sports, really, I forgot the exact number, but I want to say it's less than 10% of all the people who have played daily fantasy sports have ever turned a profit. And the people who are professional sports gamblers, sometimes they will turn a profit, and then there's some years they won't turn a profit. Though, if you talk to most of them, they'll always tell you, oh yeah, I'm winning. But that's really not the case, even though you only have to win something like 53 to 54% of your bets to be profitable. You still have to have money management skills. You still have to, understand your bankroll. You have to understand where the value is in certain bets and certain plays and that sort of thing. But most of these guys think they know more than they do, and most of them will do a lot of chest beating and say they're doing better than they are. But as one book a guy who ran a sports book in Las Vegas told me, a lot of these guys say they make a living at doing this, and he said, well, you have to define what a living is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, there are some big changes legislative going on the state level. Daily fantasy leagues in New York were actually banned earlier last year. So do you see more states kind of moving forward with that, or being more restrictive, less restrictive in terms of sports gambling?
Well, I think with the daily fantasy sports in like New York, Illinois, Texas, and Nevada, they've all taken and said, look, we think this might be some form of gambling. And myself, I'm certain it is gambling, no matter what people say, how much skill is needed to play. It is gambling. I think a lot of these states are doing this because they see how much money these companies are making and how much revenue is being generated and flowing through these companies, and the states want a piece of the action. They really just want to tax it and be able to regulate it so they can make some money off it as well. I mean, I don't think they're really concerned about the general public's well-being. I don't think they're concerned whether it's this gambling or not. I think it's more about a revenue stream that the state hasn't been taking advantage of, and they're going to start taking advantage of it. But myself, the way I lean politically is, let it be legal, same as sports gambling. Let it be legal, but then have the oversight, have some monitoring, have some regulation on it all, and then tax it. That's fine. If people want to do it, let them do it, but just, have this oversight and have this control over it so, they're not getting away with stuff. And that's what I thought a lot of the daily fantasy sites were doing in their advertising, is they weren't really being 100% truthful with how they were promoting their product. And that was kind of a consumer danger.
Mm-hmm. And we've all heard stories, about guys going out to the bookies and not being able to pay their debts and getting their kneecaps broken by mobsters. Just how realistic is that? I mean, do we see that sort of corollary to extreme crime coming from sports gambling?
Well, that's the thing with sports gambling is most people don't understand it is organized control. And FBI agents that I've talked to, former FBI agents, said, look, it's really, if not the number one, it's at least one of the top three money makers for organized crime in this country. And if we're talking $100 billion or more being wagered illegally, yeah, that's a lot of money being thrown into organized crime's coffers, and they're using that for other things. They're using it for money laundering and prostitution and other crimes as well. So when they say, it's not a victimless crime, well, that's not true, because that money is going to other organized crime endeavors. So, I mean, it is something that I think people should be concerned about. And even the guys who are betting, $50 with their local bookie, I don't think they understand that even though they may know their guy or think they know the guy they're betting with, many times bookies have to bet with other bookies to cover themselves. And it kind of goes up the chain. That money goes up the chain. And if it's not your local guy who's connected to organized crime, then someone he has to bet with probably is, or someone above him is. So that $50 you're betting kind of will filter to organized crime whether you realize it or not. So people who are betting are part of the problem in that way. So they are funding organized crime whether they know it or not, but it's a reality. It's a reality of what bookies and organized crime does.
Okay, and just to wrap up, legislative, do you see the NFL perhaps changing their stance on gambling anytime soon?
I don't think they can. I don't think they can do a 180-degree turn on this subject. I think what they need and what they really kind of want, without publicly saying, is they want to lose in court. Because then if they lose in court, if that Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which stops states from legalizing gambling, gets shot down or gets overturned in some way, even or if Congress rewrites the law, then the NFL can, embrace it and say, hey, look, if it's legal, well, now we have to do something about it, and we'll do our best to control it, and blah, 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 blah. But I don't think they themselves or any of the sports leagues can do this automatic turn and say, we've been against gambling for, 50 years, now suddenly we're going to be in favor of it. I don't think they can do that from a public relations standpoint. They need that legal loss, so it kind of gives them a free out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, as always, absolute pleasure hearing from you, Brian. Just to conclude, if people want to read more about your work, pick up a copy of Season the Abyss, where can they go?
The best place to go is my website, which is thefixisin.net, or else all of my books are available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and places like that.
All right. And, of course, to conclude, I have to ask the question, who do you have, Carolina or Denver?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't think every, NFL game is fixed. So I think if the game is on the level, I think Carolina will win. But I think if the NFL's really pushing its storyline and really doing its, movie making aspect to this Super Bowl, I think then Peyton Manning wins, retires, and goes out on top. So I think if it's legit Carolina, if it's manipulated, massaged, whatever word you want to use, then Denver will win.
Yes, a Hall of Fame quarterback winning the Super Bowl in Denver and going out. I hate remakes.
Yep.